All right, you'll cry. All right, you'll say. But if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. Now the poet is prepared to face the questions that the parents will ask him. In fact, he knows the questions that the parents will raise. Parents install television to keep their children busy so that they can do their work peacefully. Otherwise, children will trouble them and repeatedly interrupt in the midst of pressing duties and household work. And the poet is asking them to remove the television set from their homes. So, naturally, parents will not like this suggestion. This idea of the poet will not sit well with them. And the poet knows this. He says, all right, you'll cry, all right, you'll say, but if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? This is what the parents want to know. They want to know how they shall entertain their children, their beloved children, and keep them busy, keep them occupied if the television set is taken away by them. The poet anticipates this question that parents will demand an explanation, a solution. And he says, we'll answer this by asking you. What used the darling ones to do? How used they keep themselves contented before this monster was invented? The poet counter questions the parents. We'll answer this by asking you. He doesn't answer their question directly, but he raises another question. He replies with another question. We'll answer this by asking you. So he wants to ask the parents. And what is it that he wants to ask? What used the darling ones to do? How used they keep themselves contented before this monster was invented? He asks the parents what the beloved children used to do when there was no television. He calls television a monster out of anger and extreme dislike because of the threat that television poses to the children. According to him, a television is an extremely dangerous device, so he calls it a monster. Before television was invented, what used the darling ones to do then? He wants to know how the children would keep themselves happy, entertained, and busy before the television was invented. He wants the parents and the readers to imagine life before television, when technology was not an integral part of our lives. So, what would the parents or the grandparents or elders in the family do then? How would these children spend their free time then? Have you forgotten? Don't you know? The poet is asking them if they've forgotten those days when there was no TV. Have you forgotten? Don't you remember? Don't you know? So he's reminding them. These are the counter questions that the poet raises. And then he says, we'll say it very loud and slow. In case parents have forgotten, he will remind them, he will tell them, and he will say it loudly and slowly. The poet will now remind them, he will answer the questions, he will tell them what the children used to do, and he will say it loudly and slowly so that they understand, to make it clear. They used to read, they'd read and read and read and read, and then proceed to read some more. So, how many times has he repeated the word read? 6 times. This is the most important message that he wants to convey, and that is the importance of reading books. When there was no television, children used to read books. They'd read and read and read and read, and then proceed to read more books. Back then, there was a lot of emphasis on reading books. Reading was valued, and children would spend hours snuggled up with a good book. So, this is what they used to do. The poet has answered the question. This is what they used to do. They used to read, they'd read and read and read and read. Great Scott, gadzooks! One half their lives was reading books. Great Scott and gadzooks are interjections, expressions of surprise, hence the exclamation mark. Just like we say, oh, or wow, goodness. So he says, Great Scott, gadzooks. Now, why is the poet so surprised? Because, read the next line, one half of their lives was reading books. Children were so interested in reading books, they would read books for so long that one half of their lives was spent in reading books. So back then, children were entertained with books and stories. The poet expresses this with surprise. Times have changed. Now children waste their precious time sitting in front of the television. Back then, they used to spend their time wisely. They would read books, and reading would keep them engaged, which is much better and beneficial than sitting in front of the television and harming themselves. So, their parents had inculcated the habit of reading books. So, they would read and read in their free time. And this is what they used to do to keep themselves entertained, happy, and busy. The nursery shelves held books galore, books cluttered up the nursery floor, and in the bedroom by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. Galore means too many, in abundance. Books cluttered up the nursery floor, cluttered up, filled up. The floor was filled up with books. So the poet is saying that the bookshelves of these children would have books in abundance, and the floor used to be full of books lying here and there, books scattered on the floor. And in the bedroom, by the bed, more books were waiting to be read. Again, an exclamation mark. So, books could be seen everywhere, on the shelf, on the floor, and some more in the bedroom. Children were book lovers and avid readers.